Welcome to History's Greatest Battles, Season 1, Episode 16, The Battle of Saratoga, American Revolutionary War, September through the 17th of October, 1777. American forces, roughly 5,000 enlisted soldiers and 12,000 militia. British forces, 7,200 troops and artillery. With this resounding victory over the Brits, American forces tightened their grip on the indispensable Hudson River Valley, the lifeblood of the colonies' strategic defense. This decisive moment did more than just secure territory. It echoed across the Atlantic, compelling France to embrace the American cause and forge a mutual defense pact, a daring alliance that shook the foundations of European diplomacy. The resulting deluge of French munitions, gold, and naval power flowed like a river, transforming the fight for liberty from a desperate gamble into a march toward an inevitable independence.
In the wake of George Washington's electrifying victories at Trenton and Princeton during the previous winter, victories that had shocked both friend and foe alike, the Revolutionary Army began the arduous task of rebuilding in the spring of 1777. As was the case with any force built on the shoulders of citizen soldiers, spring brought with it a perennial challenge: filling the depleted ranks. Many of Washington's men had seen their short-term enlistments expire, choosing to return home to the warmth of their hearths and the embrace of their families during the brutal winter months. Washington, ever the vigilant commander, positioned himself in the vicinity of Philadelphia, eyes fixed on the horizon, waiting for any sign of movement from General Sir William Howe's formidable army, which loomed ominously in New York City, like a coiled serpent, ready to strike. While the winter snow lay thick over the colonies, Howe had crafted a bold and an audacious plan. He would unleash 2/3 of his 30,000-strong army upon Philadelphia, the very beating heart of the American rebellion. Howe believed that by seizing this symbolic jewel, the very seat of the Continental Congress and the de facto capital of the uprising, he could deliver a death blow to the revolution itself, bringing the insurrection to its knees. Yet, instead of taking the most direct route, Howe chose a more elaborate course of action. He would ferry his troops by sea, navigating up the Chesapeake Bay towards Baltimore, and then strike out overland, planning to surprise Philadelphia from the less guarded western approach. It was a strategy that, while dramatic, proved to be more circuitous than strategic. Worse still, it was an endeavor that devoured precious time, for assembling the ships necessary for such an operation was a Herculean task in and of itself. Complicating matters further was the notorious rivalry between the Royal Navy and the Army. Sailors and soldiers eyed each other with mutual disdain. And without a singular commander to unite their efforts, cooperation was little more than a distant dream. Howe spent the entire spring and much of the summer in a fruitless dance of persuasion, seeking the aid of any admiral whose ship passed his way. It was only with the arrival of his own brother, Admiral Richard Howe, that he found an ally willing to take up the cause. While Howe's ambitions floundered, another scheme was taking shape far to the north in Canada. General John Burgoyne, a man of grandiose vision and cunning, believed he had a far sharper understanding of the strategic landscape unfolding in the American colonies. Burgoyne recognized that the crucible of the revolution lay in the Northeast, a region teeming with the fiercest zealots and firebrands. These were the same defiant souls who had proven most obstinate during the turbulent years leading up to the open conflict. To sever these insurgent hotbeds from the manpower, resources, and political leadership found to the east and the south of New York would, in Burgoyne's mind, enacted devastating divide-and-conquer maneuver. Thus, Burgoyne's strategy aimed at the jugular, control of New York by dominating the Hudson River, a vital artery that connected the rebellious New England colonies to the rest. Burgoyne envisioned marching a formidable force southward from Canada, navigating along the waters of Lake Champlain to the strategically crucial city of Albany, the capital of New York, and a linchpin lying midway between Canada and New York City. This incursion would secure British dominance over upstate New York. In tandem, Burgoyne planned to dispatch a smaller contingent along the St. Lawrence River towards Lake Ontario, advancing eastward down the Mohawk River to further tighten his grip. Commanded by the capable Barry Sillinger, this force of nearly 1,000 men was to converge with Burgoyne's main army in Albany, consolidating British control over the heart of New York. The final and most audacious element of Burgoyne's strategy was a southern thrust. Burgoyne envisioned Howe deploying a substantial portion of his troops northward along the Hudson River, reinforcing the British hold on lower New York and sealing the trap at Albany. Such a maneuver would stretch British control in an unbroken line from the Canadian border down to the Atlantic, effectively cleaving the rebellious colonies in two. With confidence and resolve, Burgoyne and Howe dispatched their ambitious plans to London, where they received the Crown's official blessing. When instructed in the spring of 1777 to lend his support to Burgoyne's campaign, Howe responded with assurance, declaring that he would gladly assist once Philadelphia lay firmly within his grasp. Confident in his own timetable, Howe believed that capturing Philadelphia would be a swift endeavor, leaving ample time to divert his forces northward. Burgoyne assembled a formidable force nearly 8,000 men strong, bolstered by artillery, and comprised largely of seasoned German mercenaries known for their ruthless efficiency on the battlefield. Additionally, Burgoyne sought the allegiance of New York's Native American tribes, banking on over 150 years of animosity between them and the colonists to rally these warriors to the British cause. Yet this decision would prove a critical miscalculation. The Native American allies were unpredictable at best, notorious for their reluctance to engage in open battle, and their propensity for targeting civilian populations. The bitter history of conflict between the colonists and Native Americans only served to alienate the local New Yorkers, many of whom, despite their loyalty to the Crown, were now reluctant to support Burgoyne's advancing army. Burgoyne began his southward advance in late July, rallying his Native American allies on the rugged western shores of Lake Champlain. Their march commenced with a resounding success as they swiftly captured the rebel stronghold of Crown Point, encountering only marginally greater resistance when they laid siege to Fort Ticonderoga, positioned at the lake's southern tip. Up until this point, Burgoyne's campaign had benefited greatly from the ease of waterborne travel, but now, with Albany in his sights, he faced the daunting task of an overland march through the dense and unforgiving wilderness. The landscape was a tangle of narrow, ill-maintained roads, made all the more treacherous by rebel forces who had felled trees, turning these routes into hazardous obstacles designed to choke the British advance. Yet by early September, Burgoyne's army, undeterred and moving with a sense of grim determination, had drawn close to the small town of Saratoga, situated a mere 12 miles north of their ultimate goal, Albany. Burgoyne's troops, buoyed by the relative ease of their journey to this point, found themselves lulled into a dangerous complacency. But soon, the very ground beneath them would give way, and the path to victory would crumble into utter chaos. Meanwhile, Sillinger's detachment had pushed into New York, laying siege to Fort Stanwix near the headwaters of the Mohawk River by mid-August, their banners flying high in the summer wind. Though Sillinger's Native American allies dealt a grievous blow to a relief force at the Battle of Oriskany, word of a more formidable enemy approaching shattered their morale. One by one, they melted away into the forests, abandoning Sillinger's column to its fate. The approach of 1,000 Continental troops, led by the audacious Benedict Arnold, one of the Revolution's most formidable commanders, forced Sillinger to make a fateful decision. He abandoned his supplies, relinquished his campaign, and retreated hastily back to the safety of Canada. Burgoyne's troubles did not end there. East of his position near the small town of Bennington, Vermont, a new disaster was unfolding. Rumors of a substantial supply cache at Bennington prompted Burgoyne to dispatch a detachment of his German troops to seize it, believing it would sustain his army's campaign. But instead of the easy plunder they anticipated, Burgoyne's forces encountered a fierce and a determined defense, leading to their resounding defeat. Beaten and in disarray, the Germans fell back toward a reinforcing column, only to be ambushed again amidst the chaos by the victorious rebel forces still hot on their heels from Bennington. This defeat sent waves of demoralization through Burgoyne's ranks, while simultaneously rallying the local populace to the revolutionary cause. Thousands of militia descended upon Saratoga, eager to join Horatio Gates, who had been dispatched by Washington from Virginia to take command of this growing force. Gates, commanding approximately 5,000 Continental soldiers, welcomed the flood of volunteers with open arms, knowing that each new arrival bolstered his chances of staving off the British advance. The German troops, in their desperate search for supplies, had conducted themselves with a heavy hand, sparking outrage and resentment amongst the local populace. Equally crucial in galvanizing local support were the actions of Burgoyne's Native American allies, who, defying his orders, harassed and terrorized civilian settlements. The infamous murder of Jane McRae, a young woman engaged to a loyalist in Burgoyne's ranks, became a rallying cry. Her brutal scalping ignited a firestorm of fury among New Yorkers, turning even the undecided against the British. Burgoyne's refusal to punish those responsible for McRae's murder only poured salt into the wound, deepening the outrage. One of Burgoyne's aides reasoned that executing the culprits would incite the remaining Native Americans to desert, or worse, turn their tribes against the British forces. This decision became fertile ground for revolutionary propaganda, spurring a surge of volunteers eager to confront an enemy perceived as ruthless and inhumane. Burgoyne's main force soon encountered a lethal contingent of American sharpshooters at Freeman's Farm, just outside Saratoga. Gates had entrenched his men atop the strategically commanding Bemis Heights, positioning his forces squarely across from Burgoyne's path to Albany like an immovable barrier. Faced with Gates' formidable defenses, Burgoyne chose to dig in, placing his hopes on the reinforcements Howe had belatedly ordered northward under General Henry Clinton. Burgoyne's men waited with growing unease as September gave way to October. Meanwhile, Benedict Arnold arrived from Fort Stanwix, bringing with him additional militia, further swelling Gates' already formidable army. By October 7th, as the chill of winter began to creep in, and with no sign of Clinton's relief, Burgoyne resolved to make a desperate bid to break through the American lines and reach Albany. Although the Americans held superior positions on the high ground, it was the inspired and audacious leadership of Benedict Arnold that truly defined the battle. Arnold and Gates had clashed bitterly, and Gates had attempted to sideline him, ordering him to stay out of the fray. Yet Arnold defied these orders, throwing himself into the battle with a ferocity that made him the very soul of the rebel resistance. In the thick of the fighting, one of Burgoyne's finest officers, Simon Fraser, fell to an American sniper's bullet. Despite this loss, it was the overwhelming numbers of the rebels that turned the tide. Burgoyne was forced to retreat to a fortified position, yet it was clear to all that his campaign was doomed. Burgoyne's grand strategy lay in ruins. His supply line to Canada was severed, blocked by a combination of hostile civilian militias and a force led by Benjamin Lincoln, which had outflanked the British and launched an assault on Ticonderoga. Sillinger had already retreated, and even if his column had arrived, it would have been too little, too late to make any meaningful difference against the growing rebel forces. Clinton's advance from the south proved tentative. When he encountered determined resistance near West Point, he hesitated and ultimately turned back, unwilling to commit his forces fully. A British detachment managed to reach Kingston, a scant 50 miles from Albany, but as October's chill set in, the security of New York City seemed a far more prudent objective than a bloody, uncertain march to Albany. On October 17th, surrounded and starved of supplies, Burgoyne had no choice but to surrender his beleaguered army to Gates. The clashes near Saratoga would resonate through history as the turning point of the Revolutionary War. Firstly, these battles effectively eliminated a substantial British force from the conflict. Secondly, they shattered the British strategy to split the colonies in two, a plan that, had it succeeded, could have spelled doom for the revolutionary cause. This divide and conquer strategy was arguably the most potent British plan of the war, yet following Burgoyne's disastrous failure, it was seldom revived. The loss of the Hudson River had always been Washington's deepest fear, but after Saratoga, no serious threats to this vital artery materialized, save for the notorious plot by Clinton and Benedict Arnold to seize West Point in 1781. The bulk of New York State remained secure in American hands, as Clinton opted to stay within the protective embrace of New York City's fortifications. But the most significant consequence of Saratoga was the seismic reaction it provoked in Europe. For months, Benjamin Franklin, the diplomat, had been urging the French government to formally recognize the fledgling United States and forge an alliance. Yet France had hesitated, haunted by memories of past conflicts with Britain throughout the 18th century, most of which had ended in bitter defeats. The French were loath to engage in another costly war without tangible signs that victory could be assured. Until Saratoga, the American rebels had done little more than survive against the might of the British Empire. But this victory marked a pivotal transformation in their fortunes. In this series of battles, they had not only vanquished a formidable British force, but had humbled John Burgoyne, a general of considerable renown. The French, who had crossed swords with Burgoyne before, knew all too well his capabilities and understood that he was one of the finest generals in Britain who was deployed in North America. If the American insurgents could best him in a battle fought with European precision and tactics, then surely these revolutionaries had a fighting chance. The government in Paris, sensing a shift in the winds of fortune, decided to seize the moment. In February 1778, France and the United States signed a treaty of alliance, altering the course of the war. The next month, the treaty burst into the public sphere as France formally declared war on England, signaling a new phase of the conflict. The flames of war spread further, with Spain joining the fray in 1779, followed by the Netherlands a year later, each declaration tightening the noose around Britain. This development provided the United States with the one thing it desperately needed: a steady and reliable source of supplies and military hardware. With the fledgling nation's 13 states lacking substantial industrial capability, procuring heavy weapons had previously depended on scarce trade opportunities or the capture of enemy supplies. European loans now provided the Continental Congress with the financial lifeblood needed to pay soldiers and secure provisions, bolstering the army's morale and capability. And the arrival of French troops soon swelled the ranks of Washington's army, preparing them for the climactic campaign that would unfold at Yorktown. Even more critical for the outcome at Yorktown was the support of the French Navy, filling a glaring void since the Americans had no significant naval forces of their own. In this decisive moment, everything that the American cause required, guns, money, troops, and ships, Europe provided. Up until this point, the revolution had survived largely through sheer valor and strokes of fortune. But now it possessed the material resources to seize the initiative and press toward victory. Equally significant, the declarations of war from these other European powers forced Britain to divide its attention, eyes shifting nervously between North America and its European rivals. Gone were the days when Britain could single-mindedly crush the American rebellion. Now it had to constantly glance over its shoulder, wary of threats closer to home. This new reality required Britain to keep troops and commanders in reserve, prepared to respond should conflict break out in Europe. Consequently, reinforcements bound for North America were drastically reduced, even as the Continental Army swelled in both size and capability. Within the United States, the victory at Saratoga galvanized recruiting efforts, much like Washington's triumph at Trenton had done the year before. The Continental Congress, buoyed by renewed enthusiasm, could once again confidently muster an army for the fight. This surge in morale was crucial, especially given that Washington had not been able to replicate his morale-boosting success from the winter of 1776. When Howe's formidable forces eventually reached Philadelphia in late September 1777, Washington's army, outmatched and outmaneuvered, was unable to prevent the occupation of the city. The Continental Congress had prudently fled to Maryland, rendering Howe's grand ambition of capturing both the Congress and the symbolic capital of the Revolution a fleeting illusion. Washington's remaining forces pulled back to a position just outside Philadelphia, where they settled into the unforgiving winter quarters at Valley Forge. Enduring the harshest winter of the war, Washington's soldiers faced starvation, the biting cold, and waves of desertion, testing their resolve to the absolute breaking point. It was Gates' victory at Saratoga, not Washington's leadership at Valley Forge, that served as the beacon of hope, inspiring fresh waves of recruits in the spring. More troops, more supplies, and the alliance with powerful friends. These were the elements that would ultimately secure American victory and independence. Had the British succeeded in New York, severing the colonies in two, it could have shattered the revolution, much as a British victory at Trenton might have crushed the spirit of the rebellion. While such a victory might not have secured permanent British dominion, given the deep-rooted Anglo-American animosities, it would likely have extended Britain's control over North America for many more years. Had the British been willing to offer the Americans a voice in the governance of colonial affairs, it might have sapped the revolutionary fervor from the movement's leadership. An America that remained tethered to the British Empire for years, perhaps decades longer, would have altered the course of history in ways scarcely imaginable.